Silence was not merely the absence of sound for Amelia Nightbloom. It was a fortress. For 8 years, she had swallowed every scream, every sob, and every word, locking them deep within a chest of ribs and terrified heartbeats. In the colossal, drafty corridors of Whitfell Castle, she was a ghost in a gray apron, seen but never heard, used but never acknowledged. But ghosts are not supposed to bleed, and they certainly aren't supposed to burn when the King of Wolves walks into the room. One slip, one whispered breath would shatter the glass walls of her safety. She just had to survive him. The stone floor of the scullery was always cold, a leech that sucked the warmth straight through the thin soles of Amelia's worn boots. It was a biting cold, damp and smelling of old lye soap and freezing river water. Amelia scrubbed. Her hands, red and chapped, moved in a rhythmic circle, the stiff bristles of the brush scraping against the granite. Scrape, swish, scrape, swish. The rhythm was her meditation, the only thing that kept the panic from clawing up her throat. 8 years. She counted the years by the winters. This was the 8th winter since her family's pack had been obliterated, erased from the maps by political treachery that left her an orphan in enemy territory. To speak was to reveal her accent, her lineage, her truth. So she had become the mute maid, the girl with the damaged throat, the simpleton who scrubbed and polished and vanished into the shadows. "Faster, you useless mute!" The screech of Rosalind Greycourt shattered the morning calm. Rosalind, the head housekeeper, was a beta wolf with a temperament that soured milk. Her heels clicked sharply against the stone as she loomed over Amelia. Amelia didn't flinch. She had learned long ago that flinching only invited a second strike. Instead, she bowed her head lower, exposing the nape of her neck in a gesture of absolute submission, and scrubbed harder. The water in her bucket was turning gray, mirroring the pre-dawn sky outside the high barred windows. "The king returns tonight," Rosalind hissed, her voice trembling with a mixture of excitement and terror. "Alpha Marcus, and if he finds a single speck of dust, a single streak on the silver, it will be my head, and if it is my head, girl, I will make sure yours rolls first." Marcus. The name sent a ripple of unease through the castle staff. Marcus Whitfell, the Alpha King, the warlord of the North. Stories of him were whispered in the servants' quarters after the candles were snuffed out. Stories of a wolf the size of a warhorse, with fur as black as a starless night and eyes that could peel the soul from a body. He had been away at the border wars for 3 years. The castle had breathed easier in his absence, the oppressive weight of his dominance lifted. But now the heavy atmosphere was returning, settling like a thick blanket of snow on the roof. Amelia stood, her knees cracking, and picked up the heavy bucket. She nodded to Rosaline, keeping her eyes fixed on the beta's polished shoes. "Don't just nod at me like a dullard," Rosaline snapped, though the bite was lesser than usual. She was too distracted by her own nerves. "Go to the west wing. Prepare the king's chambers, change the linens, lay the fire, and stay out of sight. If he sees a rat like you scurrying about, he might just snap your neck for sport." Amelia scurried away, clutching the bucket handle until her knuckles turned white. The west wing. His territory. As she moved through the castle, the sensory details of the impending arrival were everywhere. The air smelled different today, sharper, laced with the metallic tang of polished armor and the earthy scent of pine brought in with the firewood. The other servants moved with frantic energy, their heartbeats audible to Amelia's sensitive hearing. Thump, 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 thump. Fear was a percussion instrument, beating a frantic tempo against the stone walls. She reached the king's chambers. The double doors were heavy oak, carved with the intricate saga of the first wolves. Pushing them open, she was hit by a scent that had lingered even after 3 years of absence. It was faint, buried under dust and neglect, but unmistakable. Storms and cedarwood. It was a scent that made the wolf dormant inside her stir, a dangerous, foolish thing. She suppressed it instantly, visualizing a cage, locking the beast away. She was human here. Just a human girl with no voice. The room was vast, dominated by a 4-poster bed draped in heavy velvet, the color of dried blood. A massive stone fireplace took up one wall, cold and dark. Amelia set to work. She stripped the bed, the linen smelling of stale lavender, and replaced them with fresh sheets crisp from the winter line. She dusted the heavy mahogany desk, her fingers brushing over maps and sealed scrolls. Outside, the wind began to howl, rattling the leaded glass panes. A storm was coming. Or perhaps the storm was already here, riding a black horse towards the gates. Amelia knelt before the hearth, stacking logs with trembling hands. She struck the flint, nursing a spark into a flame. As the fire caught, casting dancing orange shadows across the room, she caught her reflection in the dark window pane. Pale skin, dark circles under eyes that held too many secrets, and lips pressed into a thin white line. Silence, she reminded herself. Silence is your shield. Silence is your survival. But as the first howl of a wolf pack echoed from the valley below, signaling the king's approach, Amelia felt a crack in her shield. A premonition. The silence was about to get very, very loud. The arrival of the Alpha King was not a fanfare. It was an earthquake. Amelia was hidden in the shadowed alcove of the upper gallery, clutching a feather duster like a weapon, peering through the balustrade. The great oak doors of the entrance hall groaned open, admitting a gust of snow and wind that instantly dropped the temperature in the cavernous room. Torches flickered violently. The scent hit her first, a tidal wave of it. It was the same cedarwood and storm smell from the bedroom, but amplified 1,000 times. It smelled of ozone, of fresh blood, of deep ancient forests where sunlight never touched the ground. It was an alpha's scent, potent enough to make the knees of the beta guards buckle. Then he entered. Marcus Whitfell was a monolith of a man. He wore black leather armor battered by battle, a heavy fur cloak draped over broad shoulders that seemed to carry the weight of the mountain itself. His hair was dark, wet with melted snow, plastered against a forehead, etched with exhaustion and ruthlessness. But it was his eyes that froze Amelia's breath in her lungs. Even from this distance, they burned. Gold. Molten, shifting gold that scanned the room not like a man greeting his home, but like a predator assessing a hunting ground. Beside him strode Edgar Hawkhurst, his second in command, a wiry man with cruel eyes and a perpetual sneer. And behind them, a retinue of warriors, all radiating aggression and fatigue. "Dinner," Marcus said. His voice was a low rumble, a sound that vibrated in the floorboards beneath Amelia's feet. It wasn't a request. And wine. Now. The staff scattered like frightened birds. Amelia tried to retreat into the shadows, to slip away to the safety of the kitchens, but Rosalind's hand shot out from a doorway, gripping Amelia's arm with bruising force. "You," Rosalind hissed, her face pale. "Penelope has fainted. The silly girl couldn't handle the aura. You have to serve the wine." Amelia shook her head frantically, her eyes widening. "No, no, please." To serve him was to be close to him. To be close to him was to risk him smelling her fear, or worse, smelling the truth of what she was. "Do it!" Rosalind shoved a heavy silver pitcher into Amelia's hands. "Or I'll have you thrown out into the snow tonight. Do you think you'll survive the blizzard mute?" The threat was real. To be cast out was death. Amelia gripped the cold silver handle, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She lowered her head, letting her hair fall forward to curtain her face, and stepped out of the shadows. The dining hall was tense. The warriors ate with savage hunger, the only sounds the clinking of cutlery and the tearing of meat. Marcus sat at the head of the table, isolated by his own power. He hadn't touched his food. He was staring into the fire, one hand wrapped around a goblet, his expression unreadable. Amelia moved around the table, filling cups. She moved with practiced silence, a ghost in the periphery. "Don't look at him. Don't breathe too deeply. Just pour." She reached Edgar Hawkhurst first. He leered at her as she poured, his hand brushing unnecessarily against hers. Amelia recoiled internally but kept her hand steady. "A mute serving wine?" Edgar chuckled, the sound grating. "At least she won't gossip, eh, Marcus?" Marcus didn't answer. He didn't even look up. Amelia moved to the head of the table, to the king. Up close, the sheer heat radiating from him was staggering. He was a furnace. She could see the rough stubble on his jaw, the scar that bisected his left eyebrow, the tension in the tendons of his hand. She stepped closer, the pitcher heavy in her trembling hand. As she leaned in to pour the dark red wine into his goblet, A log in the fireplace snapped with a loud crack. Amelia flinched. It was a tiny movement, a microscopic jerk of her wrist. But it was enough. A single drop of wine splashed onto the Alpha King's hand. The silence in the room became absolute. It was a vacuum, sucking the air out of the hall. Every fork stopped moving. Every breath was held. Amelia froze. Her blood turned to ice. She stared at the crimson droplet on his skin, vivid against the tan, scarred flesh. Slowly, terrifyingly slowly, Marcus turned his head. He looked at the drop of wine. Then, his gaze traveled up the pitcher, up Amelia's trembling arm, past her hidden neck, and locked onto her eyes. For the first time in 8 years, Amelia felt truly seen. His golden eyes bored into hers, stripping away layers of defense. He didn't look angry. He looked curious, intense, like a wolf who had just caught a scent on the wind that didn't belong. He lifted his hand, bringing the drop of wine to his lips, licking it off with a slow, deliberate movement, his eyes never leaving hers. Clumsy, he murmured. The word was soft, but it carried the weight of a judgment. Amelia dropped to her knees, bowing her forehead to the floor, her body trembling violently. She waited for the blow. She waited for the shout. "Get up," he commanded. She didn't move. She couldn't. I said, "Get up." She scrambled to her feet, clutching the pitcher to her chest like a shield, her eyes averted. Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying her. He inhaled deeply, his nostrils flaring slightly. A frown creased his forehead. He tilted his head, listening to a sound only he could hear, the frantic rabbit-like rhythm of her heart. "Leave us," Marcus said to the room. Edgar paused with a fork halfway to his mouth. "My king?" "Everyone out," Marcus growled, a warning rumble lacing his tone. "Except the girl." The heavy doors groaned shut, sealing the dining hall. The sound echoed like a dungeon gate closing. Amelia stood alone in the vast candlelit space with the most dangerous creature on the continent. The long oak table stretched between them, a barrier that felt woefully inadequate. Marcus remained seated, his posture deceptively relaxed, but Amelia knew better. She watched the way his fingers tapped rhythmically against the armrest of his chair, not a nervous tick, but a count, a calculation. "Come here," he said. It wasn't a shout. It was a gravitational pull. Amelia took a step forward, then another. Her legs felt like lead. She stopped a few feet from him, keeping her eyes fixed on the intricate embroidery of his tunic, avoiding the golden fire of his gaze. "Look at me." She hesitated. To look an alpha in the eye was a challenge. For a servant, it was insolence. For a hidden wolf, it was suicide. But disobeying a direct command was worse. Slowly, she lifted her chin. His face was harsh, angular, carved from granite and war. But his eyes, they were intelligent, searching. He wasn't looking at her like a servant anymore. He was looking at her like a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. "You smell of fear," he said quietly. "And soap. And—" He trailed off, leaning forward slightly. Something else, something buried under the ash. Amelia's heart skipped a beat. She held her breath, willing her scent to remain neutral, human, dull. "I am stone. I am nothing." "They tell me you have no voice," Marcus said. He stood up. He was massive. He towered over her, blocking out the light from the fireplace. His shadow consumed her. He walked around the table, his movements fluid and silent, predatory grace wrapped in leather. He stopped right in front of her. She could feel the heat radiating from his chest. "Is it true?" he asked, his voice dropping to a whisper that brushed against her ear. "Or do you just have nothing to say to a monster?" Amelia stared at his throat, at the pulse beating steadily there. She wanted to speak. The urge to deny, to beg, to scream was overwhelming. "I am not mute," she wanted to cry. "I'm just hiding." She shook her head slowly. "No voice," she mimed, touching her throat. Marcus watched her hand. He reached out, his fingers rough and calloused, and brushed against her jawline. The touch was electric. Shocks of sensation zipped through Amelia's nerves, making her knees weak. It wasn't pain. It was a recognition. A biological, primal recognition that her wolf side was screaming to acknowledge. "Mate," the beast inside her whispered. "Alpha." She clamped down on the inner voice, terrified he could hear her thoughts. "Open your mouth," he ordered gently. Amelia froze. "Let me see." If he looked, he would see no scars on her vocal cords. He would see a healthy throat. He would know she was lying. She took a step back, shaking her head frantically. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. "Please, don't make me." Marcus paused. He saw the genuine terror in her eyes, not the fear of a servant for a master, but the terror of prey caught in a trap. Something in his expression softened. The golden fire dimmed to a simmering ember. "You are terrified of me," he stated. It wasn't a question. He sounded almost disappointed. Like all the rest, he dropped his hand. The loss of contact left Amelia's skin cold. "Go," he said, turning his back to her. "Get out of my sight. The silence is too loud." Amelia didn't wait. She turned and fled, her boots slipping on the polished stone. She ran through the corridors, tears finally spilling over her cheeks. She ran until she reached the small, freezing attic room she shared with the Linens. She collapsed onto her cot, pulling her knees to her chest. She was shaking uncontrollably. He had touched her. He had smelled her. And worse, she had felt it. The pull. The bond. It was faint, suppressed by her years of denial and his exhaustion, but it was there. A golden thread connecting her terrified heart to his ancient, powerful one. Marcus Whitfell was her fated mate, and if he found out who she really was, the daughter of the traitor pack that had murdered his father, he wouldn't kiss her. He would kill her. Down in the great hall, Marcus stood by the fire, staring at the hand that had touched her face. The scent still lingered on his fingertips. Soap, ash, and underneath it all, winter jasmine. It was a scent he hadn't smelled in years, a scent that belonged to high-born wolves, not scullery maids. "Edgar," he called out, not turning around. The shadow in the doorway shifted, and his second-in-command stepped forward. "My king?" "The mute girl," Marcus said, rubbing the tips of his fingers together. "Find out where she came from. Find out who she was before she stopped speaking." Edgar's eyes narrowed. "She's just a scrub, Marcus. Why does it matter?" Marcus turned, the firelight catching the feral glint in his eyes. "Because," he growled low in his chest, "I think she's lying." The days following the Alpha King's return bled into a gray haze of terror for Amelia. The castle, once a cavern of predictable misery, had transformed into a cage lined with invisible tripwires. Every shadow felt like it held a pair of golden eyes. Every corner seemed to hide the sharp, sneering visage of Edgar Hawkhurst. Edgar was hunting. Amelia could feel it in the way the air stiffened whenever he entered a room. He didn't prowl like Marcus. He skittered like a spider, weaving webs of questions among the staff. "Where did the mute come from?" Amelia heard him ask the cook, Mrs. Gable, over the chopping of carrots. "Who brought her here? Was it during the purge of the southern packs?" Mrs. Gable had shrugged, her heavy shoulders rising and falling indifferently. "She was just here, like the rats in the cellar. Came in with a batch of refugees 8 winters back, silent as a stone from day one. Don't know why you care, my lord. She's just a pair of hands." But Edgar cared. His beta instincts, sharper than most gave him credit for, had latched onto his king's suspicion. To survive, Amelia tried to become smaller. She scrubbed herself with harsh lye soap twice a day until her skin was raw and red, desperate to scour away the lingering scent of winter jasmine that Marcus had detected. She rubbed ash from the hearth into her hair to mask the shine. She hunched her shoulders, marring her natural posture, forcing her body into the shape of a broken thing. But fate, it seemed, had a cruel sense of humor. 3 days after the dinner, a summons arrived. Not from Edgar, but from the king himself. "He wants you in the library," Rosalind announced, her lips pursed so tight they were white. Jealousy radiated off her in waves. "To clean the high shelves. Apparently the other maids are too clumsy for his precious scrolls." Amelia's stomach dropped. The library was Marcus's sanctuary. She entered the room like a thief, the heavy oak door closing silently behind her. The library was a masterpiece of architecture, a 2-story rotunda lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, smelling of old paper, leather, and the heavy, intoxicating scent of him. Marcus was there, seated at a sprawling desk near the fire, reviewing distinct piles of parchment. He didn't look up when she entered, but his pen stopped moving. "The ladder," he said, his voice low and vibrating through the quiet room. The shelves on the east wall, they are covered in soot. Amelia nodded to his back and grabbed the heavy wooden ladder. She dragged it to the east wall, the scrape of wood on stone sounding deafening to her ears. She climbed, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Just clean and leave. She reached the top shelf and began to dust the leather-bound spines of ancient history texts. From her vantage point, she dared a glance down. Marcus had resumed writing, but his posture was rigid. He was like a coiled spring. "My beta tells me you have no family," Marcus said suddenly. He didn't shout. The acoustics of the room carried his deep voice straight to her. Amelia froze, her hand hovering over a book titled Lineages of the High North. She gripped the ladder, her knuckles white. "He tells me you arrived 8 years ago, the same year the Nightbloom Pack was destroyed for treason." Amelia's breath hitched. A tiny, involuntary sound, a soft gasp, escaped her lips. Marcus turned in his chair, slowly, deliberately looking up at her. The distance between them felt non-existent. "A tragic affair," he mused, his golden eyes locking onto hers, pinning her to the ladder. The alpha of Nightbloom was a fool, but his daughter, she was rumored to be a prodigy, a rare white wolf. She disappeared the night my father's soldiers burned their hall. He stood up and walked to the base of the ladder. He rested a hand on the wood, looking up at her. The angle made him look even larger, a titan of shadow and muscle. "They say she died in the fire," Marcus said softly, "but they never found bones." Amelia forced herself to breathe. "He is fishing," she told herself. "He suspects, but he doesn't know. If he knew, you would be dead." She looked down at him and offered a confused, vacant expression. She tapped her ear and shook her head, as if she didn't understand the significance of his history lesson. "I am just a maid," her eyes pleaded. "I know nothing of wolves and wars." Marcus studied her face for a long, agonizing moment. Then he let out a short, scoffing breath. "Come down," he ordered. Amelia descended, her legs trembling. When she reached the floor, he didn't step back. He loomed over her, his scent enveloping her, cedar, storm, and now a hint of something warmer. Musk. "Your hands," he commanded. She held them out, palms up. They were red, calloused, and ugly from years of lie and freezing water. Marcus took her hands in his. His grip was warm, encompassing. He ran his thumb over the rough skin, but then he traced the length of her fingers. "These calluses are from scrubbing," he murmured, almost to himself. "But the bone structure, long fingers, dexterous. These are not the hands of a peasant bred for the plow. These are the hands of a musician, or an artist." He looked into her eyes again, and the intensity of his gaze made her knees buckle. Or a killer. He released her hands abruptly, turning away. "Get out," he rasped, scrubbing a hand over his face, "before I decide to test that theory." Amelia fled the library, her heart racing so fast she thought it might burst. He was getting too close. The circle was tightening. She had to leave Whitfell. She had to run. But deep down, the wolf inside her was howling in despair. Because running meant leaving him, and the bond, fueled by his touch and his proximity, was no longer a thread. It was a chain. The plan to escape formed in the desperate hours of the night. Amelia hoarded scraps of bread and dried meat from the scullery, hiding them beneath a loose floorboard in the attic. She stole a map from the wastebin in the library, a discarded draft, but accurate enough to show the mountain passes. She would leave during the New Moon Festival, 3 days hence. The castle would be distracted, drunk on ale and celebration. But the North had other plans. 2 days before the new moon, a blizzard struck with the ferocity of a vengeful god. The wind screamed against the stone walls, and snow piled high against the gates. And under the cover of the whiteout, the enemy came. It started with a howl, not the deep, resonant howl of the Whitfell sentries, but a jagged, discordant shriek. Rogues, wolves who had lost their minds to bloodlust, banding together in starving, desperate packs. Amelia was in the courtyard, struggling to haul a basket of firewood to the main keep when the alarm bells began to toll. The heavy iron sound shattered the howling wind. "Breach! North wall!" The courtyard erupted into chaos. Guards shifted mid-stride, clothes tearing as they exploded into their wolf forms, massive gray and brown beasts that snarled and charged toward the gates. Amelia dropped the wood and pressed herself against the cold stone of the well, trying to make herself invisible. She watched as the heavy gates buckled, wood splintered, and then they poured in. The rogues were nightmares, mange-ridden, skeletal, foaming at the mouth, their eyes burning with madness. They threw themselves at the Whitfell guards with no regard for their own lives. Then she saw him. Marcus burst from the keep, still in human form, a sword in each hand. He didn't shift. He didn't need to. He moved like a whirlwind of death, his blades flashing in the gray light. He cut through the first wave of rogues with efficient, brutal grace. "Protect the keep!" he roared, his voice booming over the wind. "Don't let them near the staff." Amelia watched, mesmerized and terrified. He was magnificent. He was a god of war. But there were too many of them. A massive rogue, larger than the rest and missing half an ear, flanked the formation. It wasn't aiming for the guards. It was aiming for the flank, where Marcus was exposed, engaged with 3 other attackers. Amelia saw it happen in slow motion, the rogue crouched, muscles coiling to spring at the king's unprotected back. No. The scream tore through her mind, shattering her resolve. If she did nothing, he would die. If she acted, she would be revealed. It wasn't a choice. It was an instinct. Amelia didn't shift. She couldn't. Not here. Not now. But she grabbed the heavy iron poker from the scattered firewood pile. It was a crude spear, balanced poorly, but her muscles remembered the training of her childhood, the training of a warrior princess. She stepped away from the well, planted her feet, and threw. The iron bar sailed through the blizzard, a dark streak against the white snow. It defied the wind. It flew true. It struck the leaping rogue midair, piercing its shoulder and shattering the bone. The beast yelped, its trajectory ruined, and it crashed into the snow inches from Marcus's boots, writhing in pain. Marcus spun around, his sword instantly severing the rogue's head in a spray of dark blood. He looked down at the dead beast, then at the iron poker protruding from its shoulder. He looked at the angle. He turned his head, scanning the courtyard through the blinding snow. Amelia was already gone. She had scrambled back into the shadows of the scullery door the moment the weapon left her hand. But she knew. She knew he had seen the trajectory. He knew that throw hadn't come from a panicked maid flailing in the dark. That was a hunter's throw. Inside the scullery, Amelia collapsed against the door, sliding down to the cold floor. Her arm throbbed from the exertion. Her heart was beating a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "I saved him," the wolf whispered, proud and terrified. "I doomed us," the human wept. The battle raged for another hour, but the tide had turned. The Whitfell pack, rallied by their king's fury, slaughtered the intruders. The snow in the courtyard turned a slushy pink, then a deep, horrifying crimson. When silence finally fell, it was heavier than before. Amelia stayed in the scullery, pretending to polish a cauldron, her hands shaking uncontrollably. She waited for the door to burst open. She waited for Edgar. She waited for the executioner. Instead, the door opened slowly. It was Marcus. He was covered in blood, most of it not his own. His chest heaved with exertion, steam rising from his skin in the freezing air. He held the iron poker in his hand. He walked into the room, the other servants fleeing at the sight of his blood-soaked form. He stopped in front of Amelia. He dropped the iron bar onto the stone floor with a heavy clang. "Clean it," he said. His voice was rough, wrecked from shouting. Amelia looked up, her eyes wide. He stared at her, his expression unreadable. There was no accusation, no interrogation, just a burning, intense acknowledgement. He looked at her right shoulder, the one she had used to throw. He saw the slight tremor in the muscle. "And bring water and bandages to my chambers," he added, turning to leave. "I am wounded." He paused at the door, not looking back. "You have good aim, girl, for a mute." The walk to the king's chambers felt like a funeral procession. Amelia carried a basin of hot water, clean linens, and a jar of healing salve that smelled of arnica and comfrey. Her hands were steady now, calmed by a strange, fatalistic acceptance. The game was ending. When she entered the room, Marcus was sitting on the edge of his bed, stripped to the waist. The firelight danced over his skin, highlighting the tapestry of scars that mapped his history of violence. A fresh gash ran across his ribs, not deep enough to be fatal, but ugly and weeping blood. He didn't look up as she approached. He simply gestured to the wound. Amelia set the basin down on the nightstand. She wrung out a cloth in the steaming water and began to clean the wound. She worked with efficient tenderness, her fingers brushing against his hot skin. Every touch sent a jolt through her. The mate bond was singing, a high, clear note of rightness that drowned out her fear. Marcus sat like a statue, watching her hands. He hissed slightly when the antiseptic salve touched the raw flesh. "Easy," he grumbled. Amelia paused, her hand hovering over his chest. She met his eyes. For a moment, she forgot her station. She glared at him, a silent reprimand for being a baby about a scratch. Marcus blinked. Then a corner of his mouth twitched upward, a ghost of a smile. "You have fire in you," he murmured. "I saw it today." Amelia went back to bandaging him, wrapping the white linen around his torso. She had to lean in close to pass the bandage behind his back. Her cheek brushed against his bare shoulder. The scent of him, blood, snow, and cedar, filled her nose. She felt his breath hitch. His heart rate accelerated, a thumping drum against her ear. "Why did you save me?" he asked. His voice was barely a whisper, intimate and dangerous. Amelia tied the knot of the bandage, her fingers lingering for a split second too long on his chest. She stepped back, picking up the basin to leave. Marcus's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist, not hard but firm, an anchor. "Answer me," he said, "and don't you dare give me silence." Amelia looked at his hand on her wrist, then up at his face. The golden eyes were pleading now, warring with the Alpha's command. She couldn't speak. She physically couldn't. 8 years of silence had created a mental block that was harder to break than any physical gag. But she could not lie to him anymore. She set the basin down. With her free hand, she reached into the pocket of her apron and pulled out a small dried flower she had kept pressed in a locket she wasn't supposed to have. A winter jasmine. She placed the fragile dried blossom in his large blood-stained palm. Marcus stared at the flower. His eyes widened. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Winter jasmine was the sigil of the Nightbloom pack. It was a scent, a symbol, a declaration of identity. He looked up at her, shock rewriting the harsh lines of his face. "Nightbloom," he breathed. "Amelia Nightbloom." The name hung in the air, heavy and forbidden. Amelia didn't deny it. She stood tall, straightening her spine, shedding the hunch of the servant. She lifted her chin, looking him dead in the eye with the pride of an Alpha's daughter. "Yes," her eyes said, "I am the enemy in your house." Marcus stood up, towering over her. The air in the room crackled with energy. This was the moment he should call the guards. This was the moment he should execute the traitor. Instead, he stepped closer, invading her space until their bodies were almost touching. He raised his hand, not to strike, but to cup her face. His thumb traced her lower lip. "You should have let that wolf kill me," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "Do you know what the council will do if they find you? Do you know what I am sworn to do?" Amelia trembled, a single tear escaping to track through the ash on her cheek. "But you didn't," Marcus said, answering his own question. "You saved me." He leaned down, his forehead resting against hers. It was a gesture of immense intimacy, a surrender. "Why?" he groaned. Amelia closed her eyes, the tears falling freely now. She took his hand, the hand of the man whose father had destroyed her world, and placed it over her heart. Thump, 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 thump. It wasn't beating with fear anymore. It was beating in sync with his. Marcus froze. He felt it, the rhythm, the call, the undeniable biological truth that defied all politics and all wars. "Moon goddess, have mercy," he whispered against her lips. "You are mine." The revelation hung in the air, fragile as frost on a window pane. Mine. The word was a vow, but it was also a sentence. Marcus locked the heavy oak doors of his chambers, the click of the iron bolt echoing like a gunshot. For 3 days, time bent and warped inside those stone walls. To the castle staff outside, it was a scandal of salacious proportions, the Alpha King taking a mute maid as a mistress. Whispers slithered through the stone corridors like vipers, carrying venomous rumors to every ear in the stronghold. But inside, the reality was far more dangerous. It was a quiet, desperate worship. They existed in a suspended reality, a fragile bubble of warmth amidst the encroaching winter. Marcus didn't touch her with greed. He touched her with reverence. He spent hours just watching her, sitting in the high-backed armchair by the roaring hearth while she sat on the velvet rug, the firelight dancing over her pale skin. He was learning the shape of the woman he had been trained since birth to hate. He learned that she didn't just scrub floors. On the second day, he found her tracing the lines of a dense philosophical text on his desk, The Ethics of Power by an ancient wolf scholar. When he caught her, she didn't flinch. Instead, she pulled a piece of parchment toward her and wrote, in elegant flowing script that betrayed her high-born education, he argues that strength without mercy is just brutality. Do you agree? It was the first conversation of many. They spoke in ink and glances, their silence louder and more profound than any spoken dialogue. He learned that her silence was not empty. It was a dam holding back a flood of grief, wisdom, and wit. He learned that she hummed soundlessly when she was thinking, a vibration he could feel if he sat close enough. But the fear was a third entity in the room, stalking the shadows. On the third night, the atmosphere shifted. The wind outside howled, rattling the leaded panes, sounding like the screams of the pack she had lost. Marcus was pacing, his shadow stretching long and agitated across the walls. You have to leave, he said, his voice rough with suppressed panic. He stopped pacing and looked at her. I have loyal guards, men who owe me their lives, not the council. They can get you to the southern ports by dawn. You can disappear. Amelia looked up from her book. She set it down slowly and shook her head. No. Amelia, he growled, dropping to his knees before her. The disparity in their size was stark. He, a mountain of war-hardened muscle. She, slender and seemingly fragile. But in her eyes, he saw a will of iron. This isn't a game. My father wiped your pack out because of a prophecy. They believe a Nightbloom wolf will bring the end of the Whitfell line. They won't just kill you, they will make an example of you. They will burn you. He reached out, his large hands trembling slightly as he cupped her face. I cannot watch that. I cannot lose you now that I have found you. Amelia leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly. Then she opened them, golden fire meeting golden fire. She pulled the parchment closer and wrote with fierce, heavy strokes, I am done running. I am done hiding. I have spent 8 years as a ghost. If I leave now, I remain a ghost forever, and I will not leave my mate to face the wolves alone. Marcus stared at the words, his throat working as he fought back a wave of emotion. I cannot protect you from the law of the North. The council outranks even the king in matters of treason. If they find you here, then change the law, she wrote, underlining it twice. Marcus let out a ragged breath, resting his forehead against hers. You ask the impossible. I ask for a king, she wrote. Before Marcus could respond, a sound shattered the intimacy of the room. It was a sound deep enough to vibrate in their teeth, the heavy iron toll of the castle watchtower bells. Bong, bong, bong. It wasn't the rapid clang of an attack alarm. It was the slow, rhythmic dirge of a council summoning. Marcus froze. His scent spiked with aggression, burnt wood and ozone. They're here. The lock on the chamber door didn't just click. It shattered. The wood splintered inward with a deafening crash as the doors were kicked open. Edgar Hawkhurst stood in the threshold, framed by the torchlight of the corridor. He was flanked by 4 guards in the ceremonial black armor of the High Council, soldiers who answered only to the elders, not the king. Edgar's face was twisted in a look of triumphant malice, his eyes gleaming like polished coins. My king, Edgar said, his voice dripping with false deference as he stepped over the ruined lock. The elders have arrived, and they wish to speak with the girl. Marcus stood up slowly, placing his body between Edgar and Amelia. A low, warning rumble started in his chest, vibrating through the room. She is under my protection. Get out of my chambers. Is she? Edgar stepped further into the room, unbothered by the Alpha's threat. He reached into his tunic and pulled out a bundle of gray fabric. He let it unfurl. It was Amelia's old scrubbing apron, the one she had hidden in the attic. Edgar brought the fabric to his nose, inhaling deeply with a theatrical flair. "We found this in her nest in the attic. It smells of lye, ash, and something else, something unmistakable." He tossed the apron onto the floor at Marcus's feet. "It smells of winter jasmine." Edgar's eyes snapped to Amelia, who stood behind Marcus, pale but unmoving. "The scent of traitors. The council is waiting in the great hall, Marcus. Bring her, or we will burn the castle down stone by stone to get her. The law demands it." The great hall was transformed into a tribunal. The long tables were gone, replaced by a semicircle of 5 high-backed chairs on a dais. In them sat the elders, ancient wolves with fur turning gray, their faces etched with the hard lines of tradition and cruelty. The hall was packed. Soldiers, servants, nobles, everyone had gathered to watch the spectacle. Amelia walked in beside Marcus. She wore a simple gown of deep blue velvet that he had found for her, not a maid's rags. Her head was held high, her hands clasped in front of her. She looked small amongst the warriors, but she walked with the grace of a queen. Amelia of the House Nightbloom, the head elder, a woman with eyes like chips of flint, intoned. Her voice echoed off the vaulted ceiling. "You stand accused of survival, you stand accused of deception, and you stand accused of carrying the blood of traitors." Marcus stepped forward. "She is no traitor. She has served this house for 8 years. She saved my life during the rogue attack." "She is a Nightbloom," the elder spat. "Her blood is poison. The prophecy states that a Nightbloom will unseat the Whitfell king. Will you let a snake sleep in your bed, Marcus? Will you let your mate be your murderer?" The crowd gasped. The word mate had been spoken. Edgar stepped forward from the shadows. "He is compromised," he shouted to the crowd. "He has been bewitched by her scent. He cannot lead us if he is bedded with the enemy. I invoke the right of challenge. If he will not execute her, he is not fit to be king." The silence that followed was deafening. The right of challenge had not been invoked in a century. It meant a fight to the death. Marcus looked at Edgar, then at the elders, and finally at Amelia. He saw the terror in her eyes, but also the steel. She wasn't asking him to save her. She was standing with him. "I accept the challenge," Marcus said, his voice calm and cold as a glacier. "But not for the crown. For her." He stripped off his heavy cloak. "If I win, she lives. She is recognized as my mate and queen, and the Nightbloom name is cleared." "And if you lose?" Edgar asked, drawing his sword. "Then I die," Marcus said simply, "and you can do what you want with the kingdom." The circle cleared. The fight was brutal and fast. Edgar was fast, fueled by ambition and rage, but Marcus was fighting for something far more potent than power. He was fighting for his other half. They clashed, steel ringing against steel, shifting into half forms, claws extending, teeth baring. Edgar managed to slice Marcus's arm, drawing a spray of bright red blood, but Marcus didn't falter. He parried a strike, spun, and drove his shoulder into Edgar's chest, sending the beta flying across the stone floor. Edgar scrambled up, shifting fully into a massive gray wolf, snarling. He lunged. Marcus dropped his sword. He didn't shift. He caught the wolf mid-air, grappling with the beast with his bare hands, his roar shaking the dust from the rafters. With a surge of alpha strength, he pinned Edgar to the ground, his hand clamped around the wolf's throat. "Yield," Marcus snarled. Edgar whined, thrashing, but he didn't yield. His eyes darted to the side. Amelia saw the movement. She saw the second guard, loyal to Edgar, raising a crossbow in the shadows of the pillars. He was aiming for Marcus's exposed back. The warning stuck in her throat. The silence she had cultivated for 8 years was a wall, a physical barrier. But seeing death flying toward the man she loved shattered the bricks. The scream ripped through her, tearing at her unused vocal cords, raw and powerful. "Behind you!" The voice was not a whisper. It was a command. It resonated with the power of an alpha female, a sound that compelled obedience on a biological level. Marcus reacted instantly. He rolled to the side, just as the bolt slammed into the stone where his head had been. The entire hall froze. The sound of Amelia's voice reverberated in the silence. It was raspy, deep, and undeniable. Amelia stepped forward. She didn't look at the assassin. She looked at the elders. She walked up the steps of the dais, the crowd parting for her in stunned awe. "I am Amelia Nightbloom," she said. Her voice cracked, unused to the shapes of words, but it gained strength with every syllable. "Daughter of Alpha Garrick, and I am not your enemy." She turned to face the crowd. "For 8 years I have washed your floors. I have mended your clothes. I have tended your fires. I have listened to your fears and your hopes when you thought I was nothing but furniture. I know this pack better than any of you." She pointed at the elders. "You speak of prophecies and poison, but the only poison here is hate. My father wanted peace. He was killed for it. I survived for it." She looked down at Marcus, who had risen to his feet, leaving a defeated Edgar gasping on the floor. "I am his mate," she declared, her voice ringing clear as a bell. "Not because of a curse, but because he is the other half of my soul, and if you want to kill him, you will have to tear through me first." She shifted. It happened in a burst of blinding white light. The fur that erupted was not gray or black, but pure, snowy white, the mark of the ancient royal lines of the north. A white wolf, a creature of legend. The white wolf stood on the dais, towering and magnificent, her golden eyes blazing. She threw her head back and howled. It was a song of mourning for her lost family, a song of defiance against the cruelty of the world, and a song of love for the black wolf standing below her. One by one, the wolves in the hall dropped to their knees, not out of fear but out of instinct. The white wolf was holy. To harm her was to curse the pack for eternity. Even the elders, trembling in their high seats, bowed their heads. Marcus walked up the steps. He didn't shift. He approached the massive white wolf and buried his hands in her thick fur. He pressed his forehead against hers. "Speak to me," he whispered. Amelia shifted back, the light fading to reveal the girl in the blue dress, breathless and radiant. "I love you," she said, her voice rough and beautiful. "My king." Marcus smiled, a true, unburdened smile that transformed his face. "I love you, my queen." 5 years later. The winter snow was falling softly on the balcony of Whitfell Castle, but the air was not cold. It was filled with the sound of laughter. Amelia sat in the window seat, a book open on her lap, watching the courtyard below. The stone was no longer stained with blood. It was covered in a pristine blanket of white. Down below, a small boy with messy black hair was chasing a pup through the snowdrifts. Marcus was chasing them both, his laughter booming off the walls. Amelia touched her throat. The scar of silence was gone, replaced by the memory of the song she sang to her son every night. The kingdom had changed. The council had been reformed, the old prejudices slowly melting away like ice in the spring sun. The door opened, and Marcus entered, bringing the scent of pine and fresh air with him. He was graying slightly at the temples, but his eyes were as golden and fierce as ever. He walked over to her and kissed the top of her head. "What are you thinking about?" "The silence," Amelia said softly. "I was thinking about how loud it used to be." Marcus pulled her into his arms, resting his chin on her shoulder as they both looked out at their son playing in the snow. "And now?" he asked. Amelia listened. She heard the wind in the trees, the crackle of the fire, the distant chatter of the kitchen staff preparing a feast, and the steady, strong beat of Marcus's heart against her back. "Now," she smiled, leaning back into him, "it is music." In the end, Amelia Nightbloom did not just survive the Alpha King, she saved him. Her journey from the voiceless maid in the shadows to the White Queen of the North stands as a testament to the power of resilience. The curse of the Nightbloom blood was never destruction, but transformation. By finding her voice, she gave the kingdom a new language, one of forgiveness, unity, and a love that was strong enough to break the wheel of history. They ruled not by the fear of the Fang, but by the strength of the pack, proving that even in the coldest winter, spring is inevitable if you are brave enough to sing it into existence. Enjoyed this story? If Amelia and Marcus's journey warmed your heart, please like this video, share it with fellow romance lovers, and subscribe for more epic tales of fated mates and forbidden love. Let me know in the comments. Would you have kept your secret or risked it all for the Alpha?